Okay, this is Obesity, a Disorder from Dr. Simeon's Pounds and Inches Protocol. Bear with me, it gets better. Obesity, a Disorder. As a basis for our discussion, we postulate that obesity in all its many forms is due to an abnormal functioning of some part of the body, and that every ounce of abnormally accumulated fat is always the result of the same disorder of certain regulatory chanisms. Persons suffering from this particular disorder will get fat regardless of whether they eat excessively, normally, or less than normal. A person who is free of the disorder will never get fat, even if he frequently overeats. Why is that true? I've been accused of overeating all the time, and I eat hardly anything. I weigh 198 pounds. Okay. Those in whom the disorder is severe will accumulate fat very rapidly. Those in whom it is moderate will gradually increase in weight, and those in whom it is mild may be able to keep their excess weight stationary for long periods. In all these cases, a loss of weight brought about by dieting, treatments with thyroid, appetite-reducing drugs, laxatives, violent exercise, massage, or baths is only temporary and will be rapidly regained as soon as the reducing regimen is relaxed. The reason is simply that none of these measures corrects the basic disorder. While there are great variations in the severity of obesity, we shall consider all the different forms in both sexes and at all ages as always being due to the same disorder. Variations in form would then be partly a matter of degree, partly an inherited bodily constitution, and partly the result of a secondary involvement of endocrine glands such as the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenals, or the sex glands. On the other hand, we postulate that no deficiency of any of these glands can ever directly produce the common disorder known as obesity. If this reasoning is correct, it follows that a treatment aimed at curing the disorder must be equally effective in both sexes, at all ages, and in all forms of obesity. Unless this is so, we are entitled to harbor grave doubts as to whether a given treatment corrects the underlying disorder. Moreover, any claim that the disorder has been corrected must be substantiated by the ability of the patient to eat normally of any food he pleases without regaining abnormal fat after treatment. Only if these conditions are fulfilled can we legitimately speak of curing obesity rather than of reducing weight. Our problem thus presents itself as an inquiry into the localization and the nature of the disorder which leads to obesity. The history of this inquiry is a long series of high hopes and bitter disappointments. The history of obesity. There was a time not so long ago when obesity was considered a sign of health and prosperity in man and of beauty, amorousness, and fecundity in women, whatever that means. This attitude probably dates back to Neolithic times about 8,000 years ago, when for the first time in the history of culture, man began to own property, domestic animals, arable land, houses, pottery, and metal tools. Before that, with the possible exception of some races such as the Hottentots, obesity was almost non-existent, as it still is in all wild animals and most primitive races. Today, obesity is extremely common among all civilized races because a disposition to the disorder can be inherited. Wherever abnormal fat was regarded as an asset, sexual selection tended to propagate the trait. It is only in very recent times that manifest obesity has lost some of its allure, though the cult of the outsized bust, always a sign of latent obesity, shows that the trend still lingers on. The significance of regular meals. In the early Neolithic times, another change took place which may well account for the fact that today, nearly all inherited dispositions sooner or later develop into manifest obesity. This change was the institution of regular meals. In pre-Neolithic times, man ate only when he was hungry and only as much as he required to still the pangs of hunger. Moreover, much of his food was raw, and all of it was unrefined. He roasted his meat, but he did not boil it, as he had no pots, and what little he may have grubbed from the earth and picked from the trees, he ate as he went along. The whole structure of man's omnivorous digestive tract is, like that of an ape, rat, or pig, adjusted to the continual nibbling of tidbits. It is not suited to occasionally gorging, as is, for instance, the intestine of the carnivorous cat family. Thus, the institution of regular meals, particularly of food rendered rapidly, placed a great burden on modern man's ability to cope with large quantities of food suddenly pouring into his system from the intestinal tract. The institution of regular meals meant that man had to eat more than his body required at the moment of eating, so as to tide him over until the next meal. Food rendered easily digestible suddenly flooded his body with nourishment of which he was in no need at the moment. Somehow, somewhere, this surplus had to be stored. Okay, I'm going to stop now, and the next chapter it describes the 3 kinds of fat. Very important. See ya.